Hey, what's up? It's Paul Basic. I'm in the studio today working with SubPac to bring you this songwriting production tutorial based around my track Source Light. I got my S2 set up. If you got a SubPac, I definitely set it up, and let's get into this tutorial.
All right. Real quick before we jump into this, once again, the song is called Source Light. It's on my album Transient Horizons. You can get it for free or stream it, but I would definitely check it out before getting into this video. The reason I picked that song is because it hits a lot of different aspects of my production process that I wanted to talk about. So I kind of wanted to do a crash course using one song to kind of touch on a bunch of different stuff. So it's going to be a little bit rapid fire. I'm not going to get super duper comprehensive or deep on anything in particular, but I will try to give some good tips and pointers on as many aspects as I can get into. Also related to that is it's going to be probably better suited for maybe like intermediate producers, at least anyone with a basic to functional knowledge of music production and, digital audio production. But beginners or advanced users can probably get something out of it too. And the last thing I want to say is that I'm not here to say anything that I'm doing here is the best or is right or whatever. It's more just a behind the scenes look at how I made this song and a little bit how I approach song making in general. So that's all on that. So getting into this session real quick, there's just a couple overall things I wanted to point out. I do tend to group tracks here and there, not everything, but anything I want to have mixed as a group, primarily for volume control or group affecting things, not having multiple instances of effects or something, just have it on a group track, and I tend to separate them by color. I also try to separate clips by color if they have different, it's in the same track but it has different sequence content. Like it helps to denote that, so for copying or cutting or whatever, which sections and parts you're dealing with. So as I go through this, I want to jump into kind of different sections, both whether it's synths or drums or bass or samples, and then I'm going to kind of go through the track kind of chronologically from the intro through different parts. But nevertheless, first thing I want to touch on is the synths, starting with the intro here. So let's jump into the synths. Okay, so real quick, I just wanted to say that I'm going to have different sessions for the different sections, whether it's synths, drums, bass, partially because the main session's a little bogged down, but then also it'll help kind of focus on what I'm talking about. So let's jump into these intro synths. I'll play it real quick. Take out everything else. So it's just these intro synths we're dealing with here. I will start with this first group. Sounds like this. Now, the main melody really is coming from these two layers. And I just wanted to show kind of, I could have easily just sequenced that melody on the one layer, but it adds a little variety and tonal variation. Just break it up between the two synths. You could do it three, however you want to do it. It's just an option there. And then these other layers down here are just kind of following along with some tonal variety once again. And same thing down here, these ARPs. A little busy kind of delay ARP happening, but listen to it all together. Again, you're mostly going to be hearing this main melody coming through, and then with the kind of tonal layering happening underneath. And then again with the full mix. Oops. Okay, the processor's getting a little bogged down on that. But anyway, that's all I really wanted to get into on that. I'll move over into this first part real quick. Let's see. again, if I solo these two layers, you're going to hear the main melody happening. And again, these just following along kind of harmonically. So one thing I wanted to show on this melody here, which is just easier to see visually, is it's this kind of rhythmic melody here, just duplicated over with a little variation. This note's different than this one, and then these three change up over here. So it gives you that, kind of consistent feel, yet variety. I'll show in this interlude coming up here. I'll just fast forward over there. This interlude over here, which sounds like this. You're going to see that same variation over here where it's, this is repeated here and this is repeated here with just some variation on the notes. And while I'm here, I'll get into this. So this is really, these two are the same thing, just panned left and right. And then there's just third note fits in there. So the three of those, it's just like a bass note layer. The variation. And this one is kind of the more noisy siren synth kind of thing that follows along the melody. Again, I'll play those on their own. And then in the mix. Okay, so it kind of covers that. And then this little guy is the only time this synth happens, just happenstance with the track. Kind of a cool sounding synth, but there was something I wanted to show here. So as you can see, it's really just this one progression duplicated out over these octaves. I wanted to show kind of a better way to do that, how I would do it now. It's not something I knew at the time. So I'm going to delete out these duplicate progressions. So there we see the main progression at the lowest octave. So what you can do is if you bring in this MIDI chord effect, essentially it's going to take this input, this lower octave input, but you can duplicate it, up an octave, up 2 octaves, and then even a third. So now it'll have the same effect, but without having all the notes in your sequence. And you can do this without octaves. What it's meant for is building chords out, but you can do it with just the one input. So that's all I really wanted to show on that. So that's the little crash course on the first couple synth parts. Now I'm going to move over into the sample session. We can talk about samples real quick. Alright, so there aren't a ton of samples in this track, but there's enough to cover some of the stuff I wanted to get into. The first thing I wanted to show is how I would cut and loop and warp a sample from scratch. And I was going to use this drum fill to do that. So this is what it sounds like with the track by itself. Alright, so nothing special there. I just wanted to, again, use that as an example to show how I would cut something from scratch. So clear that out. First thing I'm going to do is turn the grid off. So Command 4, or if you go up to the options menu, you can turn it off right there. And that just allows you to freely select wherever you want and not worry about the grid. So this fill I think is in here somewhere. Right. So yeah, I'm gonna start it right there. I'm just like I just remember this is the one loop that I want, or this is a 1-bar loop. So I'm gonna select here. I'm gonna zoom in. I usually zoom in by doing Shift plus, just like a manual way to do it. Click here, Command E cuts it. I'm again looking for right before the beat on the 0 crossing. I'm going to do minus key to zoom out. This is the beat I'm going to cut at the end. Again, zoom in, shift plus. Select right before the beat. Command E. And now real quick, I just want to select and loop it. Command L. Make sure we got a clean loop going. Alright, and you can hear that organ at the end I wanted to kind of avoid or not use. And I'm going to do that by cutting some of these clean toms and putting them at the end here. So the way I'd want to do that first, so right now I've just cut the loop, 1 bar loop out of the original. It's at its original tempo, and it is not yet warped. So I'm going to copy it. I'm going to zoom out here. I'm going to turn the grid back on, Command 4 again. I'm just going to go just an empty bar here, paste it. Pasting it to the 1 of a bar so that when I consolidate it here, so by consolidating it, it's just it's making it its own clip, so it's not still linked to the original track. So Command J consolidates it again. So when you do that, it does warp it, but it keeps it at its original tempo still. So since it's a 1 bar loop, this is showing at 105. So in order to get from original tempo to 105 at the 1 bar loop, I'm going to create a warp marker at the end here by double clicking, drag that to the end of this first bar here, so that speeds it up from its original tempo to the 105. And then now that it's fit, it shows us that the original tempo is around 90. Drag this playhead to get rid of the tail there. So now we have our loop at 105. I'm going to loop it. You can hear it there. Put the metronome on. Anyway, you get the idea. So the next thing to do, which you don't have to do, but in order to get clean cuts of these one shots here, I'm going to set warp markers for each beat. But again, if you want kind of a live, loose feel, you might not want to do that. But I'm going to be rearranging and cutting it, which I tend to do a lot, or I would do this generally with my drums. So just real quick, again, I'm just double clicking on these transients and lining them up to the nearest beat. Try to go through this real quick. So now if I want to cut these out real quick to rearrange, I know that I'm cutting on a 0 crossing and I'm getting the beat right on, and it's a clean cut. And then now I'm free to move, I'm just doing this randomly, move some of these toms. So I'm going to hold down Alt as I drag this over so that it overwrites. It's not exactly how I do it, but you get the idea how you can then just move things around. So I did that a little more in more detail on this break down here, which I'll show you real fast. It's the original break, kind of a known break. So again, I warped it to 105, put in all the warp markers, but then I can kind of completely rearranged it, chopped it up. I'll play that with the original, with the full track, or just with the. So by doing that, the original break was fine, but by doing this, I can make it tighter and fit the beat as I want, and kind of just make it my own, which is another reason to set those warp markers, particularly with drums. So the only other thing I want to touch on real fast with samples are these stabs. And this just here. These aren't as obvious in the song, maybe. Let's see, I'll play it again with the track here. Put it back to full volume. Yeah, so it's not. So here are the stabs on their own. It's hard to take them out. It kind of loses something. Those stabs really add an oomph, kind of just a little extra push, a little timbre, and a better feel to me. But the thing to note about these is that so again, warp markers, I cut these from originally from a loop, but this is all made out of just the first hit from this loop. And I just repitched them with doing the transpose over here. I think they're all pitched down from the original. And then I also adjust the volume, and then have the EQ'd and a filter delay to build out. Just to give you a sense of the original though, I'll drag that out, turn these effects off, and you'll hear the original. Hold on. The original tempo, the original speed or pitch. So it's kind of a full string loop, whatever, but I really just ended up using this first hit. Pitched it down. Again, it's already warped. EQ, delay, and we get that stab, build out this melody. And then that kind of goes throughout a lot of the track. Kind of just keeps that melody going. Anyway, so yeah, that's kind of a few different uses of samples that I do. How I cut a sample, building a melody out of just a one shot. Yeah, I'm gonna move on. I think from samples, get into drums. So let's move into drums. All right, so we've already talked about the break and the drum fill. So the only other things with the drums I wanted to get into were the main kick, snare, hi-hat. Let's just take a listen with the track real quick. Solo. Okay, so with my kicks and snares, I tend to layer them and use several together to give a well-rounded sound that covers both the low end, the punch, just different characteristics depending on what I'm looking for. And then I try to EQ so that they're not conflicting and that they all come together to sound like one kick or snare, whatever it is. But because of that, I'm going to want them grouped. So I'm just in a MIDI channel with a drum rack. Now when you bring in your one-shots, they're obviously not grouped. They're just in their individual channels, which is fine at first as I'm kind of picking and choosing. I'll leave them like that. But then once I know what I want or know I have the ones that I'm going to keep, I'll just select them. You can right-click to group or do Command-G. And then I'll immediately do Command R to rename. We'll call them kicks. So then you have your master volume control, panning, and if you go over here, you can turn on your sends and returns, and you can add effects and send to that for different channels. Or if you want to add just to that chain specifically, say we're going to add a compressor to all the kicks. That's at this higher level. If I were to drag it over here, it would be on this one shot. But as I drag it out, now it's on this channel for all the kicks, which is nice to have. So I'll do that for my kicks and my snares, and here I have, looks like a couple crashes. So that's it for that. The other thing I wanted to talk about, which is easier seen in the hi-hats, is this kind of dynamics with the volume mapping. Turn this up. So you can just hear the variation versus if everything's at the same volume. It's just that constant volume versus here. And if we do it with the kick and snare, you get a better sense of that groove, and you can just have more fun with that, create more variety, have it, and the kick's doing it too. You can see it right here. I think the snare does it over here too. This is still a pretty rigid sequence, but it does give it more of a groove and kind of more of a live feel, and especially if you're trying to create live drums in a sequence like that, and you're using maybe multiple hi-hats, the volume mapping is definitely going to help with giving it that more live feel. So that's all I think I wanted to talk about with the drums. Let's get into bass production real quick. All right, so the first thing I want to get into in the bass part is just this first part, kind of the layering that's happening here. So let's take a listen with the track. Sorry, the processor's kind of getting hit a little bit, but it's just the way it's going to be. So let's take a listen on its own. Alright, so I'll just show you the individual layers happening here. Those are actually pretty similar. These two are the same thing panned out. And there's this other one, it's more of like a kind of high-end buzzy sound, and then the sub. All together, they make up that kind of fuzzy buzz bass. So that's the layering really, but I wanted to show the routing, how I have that happening here. So I just have one MIDI clip by itself with no instrument in it or anything, and then these massive instances I'm having receive this MIDI, and that's by having on the input. So if you're not seeing this, if you go to view, it's this in-out option. I think Option Command I is the shortcut. So I think it defaults to all ins and auto. So you would want to, you can have any whatever track it is you want to link it to, and you can change it however. Set it to that, and then have it set to monitor the input. That way it's always receiving from it. And same thing like with these other, if you're selecting multiple instances, you can change them. I just shift click to select multiple tracks, and then you can adjust it all for all together. So that's kind of that, and the benefit of that is you're only, if you want to edit notes and everything, you don't have to go through clips in each track. You just have the one that you can edit and change. Another thing to note, in case these octaves on your different instances aren't matching this octave, a quick and easy, you can make the adjustment in the synth itself, but a quick and easy way that I do it is with this MIDI effect called pitch, which really simply just transposes, however many you want. So if I just want to go an octave up, I can do that. If I want to go an octave down, and by doing that, if you need, then the one clip is from sending the notes from a single octave is being transposed to whatever you need on these other clips. Also to note is if you just solo the group, ideally you would group this. So then you have like the global mix controls. But if you group just that, you won't hear it. You have to group the group track and the control MIDI track in order to hear it. And then the other drawback too, I think, is if you solo just one of these, you're going to still hear all of them, which is why I was having to unmute. So these are just some quirks of this routing, but again, in this instance, and maybe for something for your own application, it's nice to just have the one clip controlling the multiple instances of synth. And you don't have to use the same synth. Obviously, you can have anything in here you want, because it's just the routing that I'm showing there. So moving on, One other thing is if you have it routed this way, you'd want to limit the number of layers if you could, just to what you need, because that's going to be processor heavy. Obviously, that's what's happening here right now. But the problem with that is that you can't freeze it down. If you wanted to kind of like consolidate the audio, you can't because of the routing. Unfortunately, that's another drawback. So that's how it all works. You can decide if you want to use that or not. The next thing I want to get into isn't so much the bass, but kind of this effect that works with the bass. So let's hear it with the track. I'll play it by itself so you know what I'm talking about first. So, there's kind of a bass thing happening in there, but it's more just an effect. So let's hear it with the track. Yeah, so it's like the bass kind of growls in, and then it follows up with that effect. I can't remember exactly how it came about, but I really liked how it works with the track, and wanted to show how it got put together, because in the track it does sound like one sound, but it's this kind of result of these layers. So let's just go through individually what's happening here. It's just like kind of a bass swoop. I think this one is really not so necessary to the final product. I could probably done without it. So that also has like the swoop, but then the other rhythm in it, which I'll get into massive and show you how that's working. And then this one is kind of the main effect you're hearing. So I could have it just that, but with these other parts mixed together, I think it sounds more full and more interesting. Just a pretty simple rhythm. So let's just solo these so you get a sense, just the rhythmically. All right, so I'll show you actually. Let's go into this one, since it's kind of the main part of that sound. I'll show you. So under this kind of performance routing, this is being routed to the cutoff filter over here. As you can see with this 5, you just drag that over. Again, I'm not trying to make this a massive tutorial, just wanted to quickly show how that rhythm is happening. So then you can draw in your envelopes here, and you can make the changes as to what type of envelope by clicking this load curve, and you can change it how you wish to change. This is what I went with. So you can see how it's following that envelope, and that's just the specifics of the sound I won't get into, but just rhythm, what's creating that rhythm is happening in the synth in this envelope routing. And that's the same thing that's happening on this other one. And you can see I have an auto filter helping with that swoop. But more, I just wanted to show kind of how this was similar to in the first part of the track where I'm showing the synths, how the melody was split between a couple synths. This is kind of the same idea, with a little more like in a kind of a rhythm effect way, how to build a sound like that, and how it works in a track. So I think that's all I wanted to cover in this bass session. I'm going to go back to the main session for the last couple things, and then that will be it. So let's switch back over. All right, so I just wanted to wrap up by kind of talking about just my general approach to songwriting in general, and a little bit Source Light in particular. But anyway, so I usually just start with one, from one layer or another, whether it's writing a synth part, a drum part, there's a sample I want to work with. And then whatever layers I feel like adding next, until there's a part happening, something's happening, and then it's about just filling that out and making it sound good. But usually in that process, I'm writing multiple synth parts or melody lines or doing different edits, and I usually try to save some of those off to the side. So then once I have one solid full part, then I go to some of those auxiliary things that I've written and find secondary parts or things that I can use to start building the song out, and start getting a sense of a sequence. So just the idea that I'm trying to get across there is it kind of all starts from one loop and building on that, and then just through that process finding different variations or parts you want to build out from there. And that's where in this particular song, something like, the intro synth part, which we went over, is going to be different than the synth part in the second part, which we didn't touch on as much, but I'll play it here. So you can see, it's still in the same key, but it just has a different feel from the other part, and they're not going to work together as well, but they probably came out of the same, trying to write parts for whatever I was initially working on. And same with this little synth part up here that only happens once. I imagine it was also a part of that process, and I got put aside, but I still wanted to use it. Ended up kind of being a transition out of the intro part into this other kind of interlude part, which I imagine was the same sort of deal. Just when I was adding layers or working on this and that, there's things that aren't working right, but you still like. So, I end up just keeping things on the side, and they end up playing a part in the song later on. So another thing I wanted to mention is, which is somewhat related to mixing, but when I start in the beginning of a song, as I'm adding some of the first parts, whether it's drums, synths, whatever, I do try to have as close to what I want as the final sound right off the bat. And I know other people don't necessarily do that, and that's just as good of an approach. The reason why I try to have the full sounds ahead of time, or just right off the beginning, is because I think it helps me write the parts. I get to hear how they're going to exactly sound in the end. When everything sounds full and good, to me it helps inspire the beginning of the songwriting process. But then because of that, some of the mixing is happening in the beginning. It is a little bit of an uphill battle when I want to be writing the song right off the bat, and I'm doing a lot of this kind of minor timbre searching and tweaking. But nevertheless, that's just my approach. So then with the mixing, it kind of happens throughout as I'm adding parts, just trying to have everything be balanced and sound good. But then at the very end is when I really get into the mixing, and it's typically more of the panning, some detail, EQ stuff, just general volume balance. But right before I get into the mixing, once the song's there, and I guess I should say, once I have the main parts, then it's more focusing on the transitions, and kind of finding ways to blend the parts, which parts work together that I can use in transition, etc. But once the song's fully there, then it's more about kind of what I call micro edits, or working on fills or little variations, whether it's melodically or in the drums, just trying to spice things up and throw in little cool, whether it's like sounds that happen once or, whatever it is, just kind of make everything have some unique elements throughout the song before getting into mixing. And then mixing and then mastering, and then that's it. So I know that was kind of a crash course. Didn't get into a lot of detail, but I probably got long-winded on some other things. But nevertheless, hopefully you got something out of that. And I wanted to thank SubPac, obviously, for working with me to get this tutorial out to whoever's watching. And thanks for watching. That's Source Light tutorial. Thanks again.